In a small town where neighbors still look out for one another, 72-year-old Thomas Harrison notices the widowed Sarah Mitchell struggling with a leaking roof. Known for his gentle heart and skilled hands, he simply shows up one morning with his toolbox, offering to help. Neither expects how this simple act of kindness will transform their lives. As winter's chill gives way to spring's warmth, their friendship deepens into an unexpected romance that surprises everyone, including themselves. But a mysterious discovery in Thomas's old toolbox threatens to unravel their blossoming love. What long-buried secret could be powerful enough to stand between two hearts finding each other again? Sarah Mitchell woke to the familiar sound of water dripping into the aluminum pot she'd placed in her hallway the night before. Plunk, plunk, plunk. Each drop echoed through her empty house like a tiny reminder of all the things she couldn't fix on her own. The water stain on her ceiling had grown again, spreading like a tea spill across her mother's favorite wallpaper. She went through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, the same way she'd done everything since Jim passed. Away 8 months ago. Coffee first, strong enough to stand a spoon in, just the way Jim used to joke about. The morning paper, delivered by Tommy Jenkins' boy, who still refused to accept payment, claiming his father had promised Jim to keep an eye on Mrs. Mitchell, standing at her kitchen window, coffee cup warming her hands. Sarah watched the neighborhood come to life, Mrs. Peterson walking her ancient poodle, the Henderson kids waiting for the school bus, their breath visible in the cold February air. And across the street, Thomas Harrison was already in his workshop, the lights casting a warm glow through the windows. She found herself watching him, more often lately, not that she'd admit it to anyone. The way he moved with such certainty around his tools, the careful precision with which he approached every task. Jim had been like that too, methodical, patient, sure-handed. The comparison made her chest tighten. The water-stained letter sat on her counter where she'd found it last night, tucked away in a box of Jim's things she'd finally gotten the courage to sort through. His handwriting, still so familiar it hurt. "Sarah, my love, promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone. You have too much love to give." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her robe pocket. Outside, Thomas Harrison was loading lumber into his truck, probably for another of his endless projects. He was always helping someone in the neighborhood, fixing Mrs. Peterson's fence, building a treehouse for the Henderson kids, teaching young Tommy Jenkins how to use a handsaw properly. Another drop of water hit the pot in the hallway. Plunk. Sarah sighed and added "call roofer" to her mental list, knowing she wouldn't. Jim had always handled those things, and now she wasn't ready to let strangers into their home. Their home. Even after 8 months, she still thought of it that way. She climbed the stairs to the spare room where the leak was worst. The water damage was spreading, and she knew she was being foolish putting it off. But every decision felt like letting go of another piece of Jim, like admitting that life really had changed irrevocably, that she really was on her own. From the spare room window, she had a clear view of Thomas's workshop. He was back inside now, probably working on one of the beautiful birdhouses he was known for throughout the neighborhood. Jim had always admired them, had even talked about asking Thomas to teach him woodworking after he retired, but retirement never came. The sound of another drop hitting the pot downstairs drew her attention back to her immediate problems. She needed to face reality. The roof wouldn't fix itself, and Jim would be so disappointed in how she was handling things. She could almost hear his gentle teasing. "Sarah Mitchell, since when do you let a little rain get the better of you?" She touched the letter in her pocket, feeling the edges of the paper that held Jim's last wishes for her. Not his last words. Those had been spoken in a sterile hospital room, but perhaps his most important ones. "Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone. I miss you, Jim," she whispered to the empty room. "I miss you every single day." Another drop fell. Plunk. Thomas Harrison's day began at 5:30 sharp, same as it had for the past 47 years. He moved through his workshop with the quiet confidence of a man who knew every tool's place by heart, every creak in the floorboards, every shadow, cast by the pre-dawn light filtering through sawdust-flecked windows. The workshop calendar hung where it always did, beside his bench vise. Martha had given him his first one back in '75, insisting he needed to keep better track of his projects. "You can't help the whole world in one day, Thomas," she'd say, smiling, that knowing smile of hers. Now the calendar was more of a neighborhood record, each square filled with neat notations in his precise handwriting. Peterson fence repair, Henderson treehouse inspection, Jenkins boy, basic tools lesson. February's page was mostly empty still, unusual for him, but lately he'd found himself distracted, his attention drawn across the street more often than he cared to admit. The Mitchell house needed work. Anyone with half an eye for construction could see that, the roof especially. He'd noticed the first signs last fall, watched it deteriorate through the winter storms. Thomas ran his fingers along the spine of his project journal, another of Martha's ideas. 30 years of neighborhood repairs, all documented in his careful hand. "You're building more than just things," Martha would say. "You're building community." He'd never told her how right she was, how each project made him feel connected to the neighborhood they'd chosen together so long ago. He pulled out his latest journal entry, sketches for Mrs. Peterson's new gate latch, measurements for the Henderson kids' treehouse reinforcement. His pencil hovered over the blank space below, where he'd been meaning to draw up plans for his own projects. Instead, he found himself sketching the Mitchell house's roof line, marking the likely trouble spots. The electric kettle clicked off, another of his morning rituals, 1 cup of English breakfast tea just like Martha used to make. As he stirred honey into his cup, his gaze drifted to the small shelf above his workbench. Martha's picture smiled down at him, taken on their 40th anniversary, just months before the stroke. "No more promises," he'd told her afterward, sitting by her hospital bed. "I can't, I won't," but she'd made him promise anyway. "Keep helping people, Thomas. It's what you're meant to do." Through the window, he could see Sarah Mitchell's kitchen light come on. She'd be having her morning coffee now, probably standing at her own window. He'd seen her watching his workshop sometimes, though she probably thought he hadn't noticed. There was something in her expression that reminded him of himself in those first months after Martha, that mixture of loss and loneliness and stubborn determination to manage alone. The roof would only get worse. He knew it with the certainty of someone who'd been building and fixing things his entire adult life. Already he could see the water damage spreading along the eaves. "Another good storm and not my business," he muttered, turning back to his workbench. He had projects already lined up: Mrs. Peterson's gate, the Henderson treehouse, young Tommy Jenkins wanting to learn basic carpentry. But his eyes kept straying to the calendar, to those empty February squares. Martha's voice seemed to whisper, "From the photograph, since when did you let a little fear stop you from helping someone in need?" "It's not fear," he argued with the empty workshop, but even as he said it, he knew he was lying. Fear of getting involved, fear of caring too much, fear of breaking that promise he'd made in a hospital room 5 years ago. The sun was properly up now, painting his workshop in familiar shades of gold. Across the street, he watched Sarah Mitchell collect her morning paper, saw her pause to look up at her roof with worried eyes. Thomas picked up his pencil and carefully wrote in the next empty square, "Mitchell roof. Initial inspection." The question mark stared back at him, challenging him. Martha would have laughed at his hesitation. Some promises, she'd told him that last day, are meant to be broken. The broken shingle lay in Thomas's palm, like an accusation. He'd found it in his front yard that morning, blown clear across the street from Sarah's roof during the night's storm. The edges were cracked and curled, signs of age and weather damage, that made his craftsman's heart wince. This wasn't just about a single leak anymore. The whole roof was likely compromised. He stood at the foot of Sarah's driveway, the shingle in one hand, his ancient leather toolbox in the other. 5 minutes he'd been standing there, running through opening lines in his head like a nervous schoolboy. "Mrs. Mitchell, I couldn't help but notice—" No, too formal. "Sarah, about your roof." Too direct. The decision was made for him when Sarah's front door opened. She stepped out onto her porch, wrapped in a thick cardigan against the February chill, empty coffee cup in hand. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she said finally, her voice carrying that careful politeness of neighbors who've lived across from each other for years without ever really talking. "Thomas," he corrected automatically. "I'm Thomas," he held up the shingle. "Found this in my yard this morning." Sarah's cheeks colored slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry about that. The wind last night." "Wind's not your problem." The words came out more bluntly than he'd intended. "Sorry, I've noticed some signs of serious wear on your roof. That leak you've got, it's likely just the beginning." She set her coffee cup down on the porch railing, her fingers lingering on its rim. "I've been meaning to call someone." "Have you?" The question was gentle, not accusatory. Sarah met his eyes again, and this time he saw past the polite neighbor, facade to the worry beneath. "No," she admitted, "I haven't." Thomas took a step forward, then another, closing the distance to the foot of her porch stairs. "I could take a look, no obligation, just a neighbor helping a neighbor. I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering." He lifted his toolbox slightly. "Been doing this kind of thing longer than I care to admit. Ask anyone. In the neighborhood." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Oh, I know. Jim used to—" The smile faltered. "He always admired your work." The mention of Jim hung in the air between them. Thomas waited, giving her space to either continue or retreat. After a moment, she squared her shoulders. "Would you like some coffee? While you look things over?" It was more than an offer of coffee. They both knew it. It was permission. To cross a threshold. To move from polite neighbor to something else. Something neither of them had quite defined yet. "Coffee would be nice," he said. Sarah led him through the house to the kitchen, apologizing for imagined disorder, though everything was spotless. The aluminum pot in the hallway caught his eye, strategically placed under a water stain that spread across the ceiling like spilled watercolors. In the kitchen, while Sarah busied herself with the coffee maker, Thomas found himself studying. The room. It was bright and welcoming, but there were signs of Jim everywhere. A man's coffee mug on a hook, a pair of reading glasses on the windowsill, a notepad by the phone with his handwriting still visible on the top sheet. "Milk? Sugar?" Sarah asked, her back to him. "Black is fine." He set his toolbox down carefully, the leather worn smooth from decades of use. The brass latches caught the morning light, reminding him suddenly, sharply, of Martha's last Christmas gift to him, the engraved plate on the lid, "To my husband, who fixes more than just things." Sarah turned with 2 steaming cups, caught him lost in memory. Something passed between them then, a moment of recognition, of shared understanding. They were both haunted by ghosts that lived in coffee cups and toolboxes, in morning routines and muscle memory. "We should look at that roof," Thomas said finally, accepting the cup she offered. "Yes," Sarah agreed softly. "I suppose we should." They both knew they weren't just talking about the roof. The old house plans were brittle at the edges, their blue lines faded to ghost white, where sunlight had bleached them through the years. Thomas spread them carefully across Sarah's kitchen table, his weathered fingers tracing the architects. Notations from 1962. "Jim kept everything," Sarah said, watching Thomas study the plans. She'd found them in the back of the hall closet, tucked away in a manila envelope marked "House Documents" in Jim's precise handwriting. "Smart man." Thomas tapped a section of the roof layout. "See this? The previous owner added a dormer in. 73. Changed the whole drainage pattern. That's probably where our trouble started." Our trouble. The phrase hung in the air, casual yet significant. Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, its warmth a comfort against the morning chill. "How bad is it?" she asked, not entirely sure she wanted to know. Thomas looked up, his eyes kind but honest. "Well, the good news is the underlying structure's solid. The bad news—" He pulled out a photograph he'd taken during his inspection. "Water's been getting under these shingles for months, maybe longer. We're looking at more than just a patch job." Sarah studied the photo, trying to see what he saw. The shingles looked like shingles to her, but she trusted his judgment. After 30 years of building and repairing homes across 3 counties, Thomas Harrison knew his craft. "What do you suggest?" He outlined his plan, pointing to different sections of the blueprint: complete re-shingling of the north face, new flashing around the dormer, proper drainage channels. As he spoke, his passion for the work showed through, transforming him from the quiet neighbor she'd watched from her window into someone altogether more animated, more present. "It's a big job," he concluded. 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on the weather. "I'd understand if you'd rather hire a professional crew." "Aren't you professional?" The question caught him off guard. "Well, yes, but I meant, then I'd like you to do it." The words came out more firmly than she'd intended. If you're willing." Thomas's expression softened. "I'm willing." He folded the plans with careful precision. "We should start tomorrow, before that storm system moves in next week." Sarah walked him to the door, where he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Finally he said, "You know, Martha, my wife, she used to say a house is like a living thing. You have to listen to what it's telling you." "And what's my house telling you?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "That it's ready for some care, like maybe its owner." The observation was gentle, free of judgment, but it struck a chord in Sarah. She thought of Jim's letter in her robe pocket. "Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone." 7:30? Thomas asked, checking his watch. "We'll need the early light." Sarah nodded, surprised to find herself looking forward to tomorrow. 7:30. She watched him cross the street to his house, his toolbox swinging gently at his side. The morning sun caught the brass latches, sending a bright flash across her garden. For the first time in 8 months, the silence in her house felt less like an absence and more like an anticipation. Upstairs, the pot in the hallway caught another drop. Plunk. But now the sound carried a different meaning, not an accusation of neglect, but a reminder that some things could be fixed, some things could be made right again. She returned to the kitchen and ran her fingers over the old blueprints, imagining Jim's hands doing the same years ago. "I'm taking care of our home," she whispered, and somewhere she thought she could hear him smile. Outside, Thomas was already in his workshop, light spilling from its windows as he prepared for tomorrow. She watched him move through the familiar space, his shadow dancing across the sawdust-frosted glass, and felt something shift in her heart, subtle as a house settling, significant as a foundation stone being laid. The recipe box hadn't been opened since Jim's passing. Sarah found it on the highest kitchen shelf, where she'd placed it that first awful week after the funeral, when every reminder had felt too sharp to touch. Now she brushed the dust from its lid, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the hand-painted flowers that decorated its surface. Inside, decades of family history were recorded in ingredient lists and cooking instructions. Her mother's pot roast, Jim's grandmother's sugar cookies, her own contributions collected over 40 years of marriage. And there, near the front, the recipe she was looking for, her special meatloaf, the one Jim always bragged about to the neighbors. "You don't have to feed me, you know," Thomas had protested that morning after 3 hours of wrestling with stubborn shingles in the February cold. But she'd insisted. It was the least she could do, she'd told him, though truthfully, she'd surprised herself with the offer. Now, as evening approached and the smell of meatloaf filled the kitchen, Sarah found herself humming, something she hadn't done in months. The recipe box sat open on the counter, a bridge between past and present. The knock at the back door came precisely at 6, as agreed. Thomas stood there with a bottle of wine, looking slightly uncertain in clothes that were clearly his good work shirt and slacks. "I hope Red is okay," he said, handing her the bottle. Martha always said you can't go wrong with red. Martha was right. Sarah accepted the wine, noting how he'd cleaned up, his silver hair neatly combed, hands scrubbed, but still bearing the honest traces of the day's work. Come in. It's just about ready. The kitchen table, cleared of blueprints and work plans, now bore her mother's lace tablecloth and the good plates she hadn't used since Christmas. Thomas noticed, she could tell by the way his eyes softened at the sight. But he didn't comment. Something smells wonderful, he said instead, following her lead in maintaining the careful balance they'd established. Mom's recipe, Sarah replied automatically, then corrected herself. Well, my version of it. I always add a little extra sage. They settled into an easy rhythm of serving and passing, the initial awkwardness melting away like snow in spring. Sunshine. The wine helped, but it was more than that. There was a comfort in sharing food with someone who understood the weight of empty chairs and unused place settings. This is amazing, Thomas said after his first bite. I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this since. He trailed off, but Sarah understood. How long? She asked softly. 5 years, 2 months. He met her eyes across the table. Martha, loved to cook, said it was her way of showing love without words. Sarah nodded. Jim was the opposite, couldn't boil water without supervision, but he loved to watch me cook, would sit right there at the counter, telling me about his day. The memory brought a smile instead of tears, which felt like its own kind of miracle. Martha tried to teach me, Thomas continued, relaxing into the conversation, said every man should know at least 5 decent recipes. I managed 3 before we gave up. Which 3? Grilled cheese, spaghetti with meat sauce, and he chuckled. Well, I make a mean bowl of cereal. Their laughter mingled in the warm kitchen air, startling them both with its naturalness. Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this, freely, without the sharp edge of grief waiting to cut her. Later, as they cleared the table together, Thomas paused by the recipe box, still open on the counter. My mother had one just like this, he said. Wonder whatever happened to it. Sarah hesitated, then said, You should come to dinner again. Maybe I'll try one of the other recipes. The invitation hung between them, weighted with possibility. Thomas dried his hands on the dish towel, his movements deliberate. I'd like that, he said finally. And maybe one day I'll make you my famous spaghetti. I'd like that too. They shared a smile, small but genuine, as comfortable as well-worn work gloves. Outside, the February wind whistled through the half-finished roof repairs, but in the kitchen, surrounded by the warmth of shared memories and new possibilities, neither of them noticed the cold. Sarah found the medal by accident. She'd gone to Thomas's workshop to fetch more roofing nails while he was up on the ladder and knocked his toolbox over, spilling its contents across the sawdust-covered floor. As she gathered the scattered tools, something caught the light, a small bronze medal tarnished with age. Its ribbon faded to a muted blue. Distinguished Service Cross, the inscription read. She knew enough about military honors to understand what she was holding. What she didn't understand was why Thomas had never mentioned it. Find those nails? His voice from outside made her start. She quickly returned the medal to the toolbox, but not before noticing the date, April 15th, 1968. Still looking, she called back, her mind racing. Thomas had told her he'd spent his younger years traveling around Asia before settling down with Martha. He'd never mentioned Vietnam. When she emerged from the workshop, nails in hand, Thomas was already back up on the roof, hammering steadily. She watched him work, seeing him differently now. The precision of his movements, the quiet efficiency, the way he always seemed to scan his surroundings before settling into a task. Took you a while, he commented as she passed up the nails. Your workshop's very organized, she said carefully. Didn't want to disturb anything. His hammer paused mid-swing. Something in her tone must have given her away. When he looked down at her, his eyes held a question. You found it, didn't you? Sarah nodded. I'm sorry. I knocked over your toolbox. Thomas sat back on his heels, surveying the half-finished roof, as if seeing beyond it to something far away. Never could bring myself to put it somewhere proper. Martha wanted me to display it, but—" he shrugged. "Some memories are better kept in toolboxes. You don't have to talk about it." "No," he agreed, "I don't. But maybe I should." He climbed down the ladder with that same careful precision she'd noticed earlier. Coffee? In her kitchen? Thomas cradled his mug, staring into its depths as if reading tea leaves. It was supposed to be a simple rescue mission. 2 of our boys shot down near Quezon. We went in at night, 4 of us. Got our men out, but— he took a slow breath. "The medal says Distinguished Service. Doesn't mention the cost." Sarah reached across the table, touching his hand lightly. His fingers were calloused from decades of work, strong and steady despite the tremor in his voice. "When I met Martha, I was still angry, confused. She saved me, really, taught me to build things instead of—" he gestured vaguely. "The first time I fixed something, really fixed it, made it better than it was before, I felt human again." "Is that why you help everyone in the neighborhood?" He smiled slightly. "Martha figured it out before I did, said every repair job was like a small redemption, turning broken things whole again. And now you're fixing my roof. Your roof. Mrs. Peterson's fence, the Henderson kids' treehouse." His eyes met hers, all better than thinking about jungles and helicopters. They sat in comfortable silence, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Jim was in Vietnam too. Never saw combat. He was a supply clerk in Saigon. But he understood what it did to people. He used to volunteer at the VA hospital." Thomas nodded slowly. "Good man." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Like someone else I know." His hand turned under hers, fingers intertwining briefly before letting go. The touch was fleeting but deliberate. Like a question asked in a language they were both still learning. "Better get back to work," he said, standing. "That rain's coming tomorrow." But something had shifted between them, like a lock's tumblers falling into place. As they returned to their tasks, Thomas to his roofing, Sarah to her household chores, the rhythm of their day felt different, more honest, more real. The medal remained in the toolbox, but its weight was lighter now, shared between 2 people who understood that some scars were meant to be carried together. The emergency radio crackled to life with an urgent beep that made them both jump. Severe storm warning for Cedar Grove and surrounding counties. All residents advised to seek immediate shelter. High winds, possible hail. Thomas looked up from where he was securing a tarp over the unfinished section of roof. "That's moving in faster than they predicted." The western sky had turned an ominous green-gray, clouds roiling like waves before a tsunami. "You should come down," Sarah called from the back porch, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the wind. "Thomas, please." He nodded, gathering his tools with practiced efficiency. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as he descended the ladder. Thunder rolled in the distance, closer than before. "You can wait it out here," Sarah said, holding the door open. Not a question, but not quite a command either. Inside, they watched through the kitchen window as the storm transformed their quiet street into a chaos of wind-whipped trees and horizontal rain. The emergency radio continued its steady stream of updates, providing a soundtrack to nature's fury. "The tarp should hold," Thomas said, though his eyes kept tracking to the ceiling. "As long as we don't get—" A sharp crack of hail against the windows cut him off. "You were saying?" Sarah's attempt at humor couldn't quite mask her worry. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged them into darkness. In the sudden quiet, their breathing seemed unusually loud. "Under sink," Sarah said. "There should be candles. Got a flashlight in my—" Thunder boomed directly overhead, rattling the windows. "Toolbox." They fumbled in the dark, Sarah finding matches and half-forgotten candles, Thomas retrieving his flashlight. As warm light slowly filled the kitchen, they found themselves standing closer than either had intended, the storm creating an intimate bubble around them. "Reminds me of the monsoons," Thomas said softly, setting his flashlight on the counter. "In Vietnam, We'd hunker down, tell stories to pass the time, anything to keep our minds off the thunder. Sarah lit another candle. What kind of stories? Oh, the usual. Girls back home, plans for the future. Charlie Jenkins swore he was going. To open a surf shop in Hawaii. He smiled at the memory. Never did, far as I know. Opened an insurance office in Ohio instead. And what were your stories? Sarah arranged the candles on the kitchen table, creating a small circle of warmth. Didn't have many back then. Was too busy being angry at the world. He watched the candlelight dance across her face. Funny how life gives you better stories later when you're ready for them. Another crash of thunder. But neither of them jumped this time. The radio warned of a second storm cell approaching. We should check the ceiling, Sarah said. In case the tarp. They made their way upstairs, flashlight beam leading them. The spare room was dark, except for occasional flashes of lightning through the windows. Their shadows merged and separated on the walls as they moved. No drips, Thomas observed, running his hand along the ceiling. Tarps holding. Sarah touched the wall where water stains had marked her mother's wallpaper. You do good work. Not finished yet. No, she agreed softly. I suppose we're not. In the dim light their eyes met and held. The storm raged outside, but in that moment something quiet and profound passed between them. An understanding that went beyond words. The emergency radio buzzed from downstairs. Storm expected to continue through the evening hours. I should make us some tea, Sarah said. Since it seems we'll be waiting a while, I'd like that. They made their way back to the kitchen, moving more surely now in the darkness, as if they'd found their bearings in more ways than one. The candles still burned on the table, casting long shadows that seemed to hold all the stories they had yet to tell each other. Local widower helps neighbor with home repairs, read the headline in the Cedar Grove Gazette. Sarah stared at the small article on page 3, complete with a photo of Thomas on her roof, taken without either of them noticing. The caption made her cheeks warm. Thomas Harrison, 72, proves that neighborly spirit is alive and well in Cedar Grove. She was still holding the paper when her phone rang. Her daughter Jenny's number flashed on the screen. Mom, why am I reading about you in the Gazette's online edition? Sarah sighed. Good morning to you too, dear. Don't dear me. Why didn't you tell me the roof was that bad? And who is this Thomas Harrison? He's just a neighbor, Jenny. He's being kind enough to help with some repairs. Just a neighbor? Jenny's tone carried years of practiced skepticism. Mrs. Peterson called me yesterday, going on about how wonderful it is that you're getting back out there. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. Eleanor Peterson needs to mind her own business. Mom, Jenny's voice softened. It's okay. You know, if you are interested in someone, Dad would want... Jenny, please. But even as she protested, Sarah found herself looking out her kitchen window toward Thomas's workshop. He was already there, the morning light reflecting off the windows. It's not like that, except maybe it was, just a little. The thought caught her off guard. The doorbell rang, saving her from Jenny's follow-up questions. I have to go, honey. Love you. She opened the front door to find Mrs. Peterson holding a casserole dish. Thought you might like some lunch, she said, breezing past Sarah into the house. Working men need feeding, after all. Eleanor, now don't you worry about thanking me. That's what neighbors are for. Mrs. Peterson set the dish on the counter, then turned with barely concealed eagerness. Though I must say, it's so nice to see you and Thomas collaborating. The way she said collaborating made it sound like a scandal. He's fixing my roof, Sarah said firmly. Mrs. Peterson's smile was knowing. You know, I remember when he and Martha first moved here. Such a handsome couple. And now, she patted Sarah's arm. Life has a way of giving second chances, doesn't it? Before Sarah could respond, a knock at the back door announced Thomas's arrival. He stepped into the kitchen, taking in the scene. Sarah's exasperated expression, Mrs. Peterson's delighted. Morning, Eleanor, he said carefully. Sarah, I've got those shingle samples for you to look at. Oh, don't let me interrupt. Mrs. Peterson gathered her purse. Just dropping off some lunch for you both. Sarah, dear, don't forget the bridge club meets tomorrow. Thomas, you should convince her to come. We miss her stories. After she left, Sarah and Thomas stood in awkward silence. So, he said finally, I take it you saw the paper. Did you know they were taking pictures? No. He pulled the shingle samples from his pocket, though I did wonder why Tommy Jenkins' boy was hiding behind the Hendersons' fence with a camera. Despite herself, Sarah laughed. The whole town's talking, aren't they? Small towns. Thomas shrugged, but his eyes were concerned. Does it bother you? The question hung between them, weighted with more meaning than its simple words suggested. Sarah thought of Jenny's call, of Mrs. Peterson's knowing smile, of Jim's letter in her bedside drawer. Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone. No, she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Does it bother you? Only if it bothers you. He laid the shingle samples on the counter, deliberately not meeting her eyes. Though I should warn you, my daughter Mary called this morning. Apparently the Gazette has a website now. Sarah groaned. Jenny called too. They're probably comparing notes as we speak. Their eyes met, and suddenly they were both laughing. At the situation, at their well-meaning but interfering children, at the absurdity of feeling like teenagers caught passing notes in class. Well, Thomas said when they'd caught their breath. Since the town's already talking, he gestured to Mrs. Peterson's casserole. Lunch? Sarah smiled, remembering Jim's words about not spending life alone. Lunch, she agreed. But you get to explain to Mrs. Peterson why her casserole dish came back empty. Deal. The Valentine's Day card appeared on Sarah's front porch early that morning, unsigned but unmistakably handwritten. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, with a simple red heart embossed on the front. Inside, in careful script, for the woman who makes every day brighter, even when it rains. Sarah stood in her doorway, the card trembling slightly in her hands. Her first Valentine since Jim. She wasn't ready for this. Was she? Across the street, Thomas's workshop remained dark. He'd mentioned taking the morning off, something about errands in the city. She found herself wondering if he'd left the card, then immediately felt guilty for hoping he had. The phone rang inside, startling her from her thoughts. Jenny, probably, calling with her daily check-in since the newspaper article. But when Sarah answered, it was Mary, Thomas's daughter. Mrs. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me calling. Dad gave me your number for emergencies and, well, she paused. Has he been by this morning? No, he said he had errands. Sarah's grip tightened on the card. Is everything all right? It's Valentine's Day. He always gets a bit quiet this time of year. First time he spent it alone since Mom died. Another pause. I thought maybe, with you two becoming friends. Friends. Such a simple word for such a complicated feeling. I'll keep an eye out for him, Sarah promised. After hanging up, she found herself in the kitchen, staring at the recipe box. Without quite meaning to, she pulled out the card for Martha's. Famous sugar cookies, the recipe Thomas had mentioned his wife making every Valentine's Day. The ingredients were simple enough. She had everything except... A knock at the back door interrupted her inventory. Thomas stood there, holding a paper bag from the hardware store and looking slightly embarrassed. Brought those new flashing pieces we talked about, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. On Valentine's Day. Ruth doesn't know it's a holiday. He set the bag down, then finally looked at her. Though I did get you something else. Nothing fancy, just... From behind his back he produced a small potted plant. A miniature rose. Bush, its buds just beginning to open. Thought your kitchen window could use some color, he said. Once spring comes, we can plant it in the garden. If you want. The word hung between them like a promise. Sarah touched one of the tiny buds. It's perfect. She hesitated, then, I was just about to try making Martha's sugar cookies. Mary called, and I thought, but I'm missing vanilla extract. I have some, Thomas said quickly. Martha always bought it in bulk. never did use it all. His voice caught slightly on his late wife's name. Would you like to help me bake them? The question was about more than cookies, and they both knew it. Thomas studied her face, seemed to come to a decision. Let me get the vanilla, and Sarah... He gestured to the unsigned card on her counter. That wasn't from me, though I wish I'd thought of it. She felt herself blush. Mrs. Peterson dropped it off yesterday, said she couldn't bear the thought of anyone being alone on Valentine's Day. They shared a knowing look, both thinking of their neighbor's determined matchmaking. An hour later, the kitchen was warm with the smell of baking cookies, the counters dusted with flour. They worked together comfortably, Thomas measuring ingredients with the same precision he brought to his carpentry, Sarah showing him how to roll the dough to just the right thickness. Martha would be laughing right now, he said carefully, cutting out heart shapes. She always said I was hopeless in the kitchen. Jim too, though he made excellent toast. Their laughter mingled with the timer's ding. As Sarah pulled the first batch from the oven, she caught Thomas looking at her, with an expression that made her heart skip. Sarah, his voice was gentle. I'm glad the card wasn't from me. She set down the cookie sheet. Oh, because when I do tell you how you brighten my days, I want it to be in my own words, not on a card, not because it's Valentine's Day, but because... He brushed flour from his hands, choosing his words carefully. Because you deserve to hear it properly. The kitchen seemed very quiet suddenly, filled with the sweet smell of cookies and possibilities. I think, Sarah said softly, I'd like to hear those words when you're ready to say them. Thomas smiled, reaching for another cookie cutter. Then we'll save them for the right moment. For now, he held up the heart-shaped cutter. We have. In cookies to finish. Outside, winter still held Cedar Grove in its grip, but in Sarah's kitchen, something new was blooming, as delicate and promising as the rosebuds on Thomas's gift. Sarah found the ring while cleaning Thomas's tools after a long day of roof work. It fell from a hidden compartment in his toolbox, a small velvet box, worn at the edges, but obviously cherished. She wouldn't have opened it, except it had sprung, loose on impact, revealing a stunning vintage engagement ring. Her first thought was that it must have been Martha's, but then she noticed the inscription inside the band, to Helen. All my love, 1965. Helen, not Martha. The name hit her like a physical blow. In all their conversations, all their shared confidences, Thomas had never mentioned a Helen. Sarah, did you find that wrench I was looking for? Thomas's voice carried from outside, where he was finishing up the day's work. She quickly closed the ring box, her hands shaking. Still looking, she called back, hating the tremor in her voice, but it was too late. She heard his footsteps approaching the workshop, then the sudden silence as he entered and saw what she was holding. Ah, just one syllable, but it carried decades of weight. I'm sorry, Sarah said quickly. It fell out when I was cleaning. I didn't mean to pry. Thomas leaned against his workbench, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. No, I suppose it's time you knew. He took a deep breath. Helen was my first love. My first everything, really. We were engaged in '65, just before my deployment. Sarah set the ring box carefully on the bench between them. What happened? War happened. Fear happened. I came back, different, angry, lost. He picked up the box with gentle fingers. She tried to understand, to help, but I pushed her away, kept pushing until she finally let go. And Martha saved me. Found me when I was at my lowest and showed me how to build a life again. His eyes met Sarah's. She knew about Helen, about the ring. Asked me once why I kept it. I told her it was to remind me that love isn't always enough. You have to be worthy of it too. Sarah thought of Jim's letter, his final wish for her happiness. And have you become worthy? I'd like to think I'm closer than I was. Thomas set the ring box down. Martha helped me understand that holding on to guilt doesn't honor the past. It just poisons the future. Why didn't you tell me about her? About Helen? Because, he ran a hand through his silver hair. Because what's growing between us feels precious, and I was afraid. Of what? Of history repeating itself, of not being whole enough, healed enough for what you deserve. Sarah looked at the ring box. Such a small thing to hold so much history. Did you ever try to find her? Helen, once, about 10 years ago. Found out she'd had a good life. Marriage, kids, grandkids. Died in her sleep in 98. His smile was bittersweet. Martha held me that night, while I grieved for a love I'd thrown away 30 years before. That's when I put the ring in my toolbox. A reminder to never let fear steal my chances again. Sarah touched the box lightly. And now? Now? Thomas met her eyes steadily. Now I'm telling you everything. Because you deserve the whole truth, Sarah. Even the parts that shame me. She thought about her own hidden things. Jim's letters, his wedding ring still in her jewelry box, the memories she sometimes felt guilty for starting to share with someone new. We all have ghosts, she said softly. Yes, Thomas straightened up. The question is, do they have to haunt us forever? Sarah looked around the workshop, at the life Thomas had built from the ashes of his losses, at the careful organization that spoke of lessons learned through pain, at the man himself, standing before her with his heart as open as she'd ever seen it. No, she said finally, I don't believe they do. Thomas's shoulders relaxed slightly, though she could see uncertainty still lingering in his eyes. Where does this leave us? Sarah picked up the ring box and held it out to him. It leaves us with a choice. We can let old fears dictate our future or we can choose to be brave together. He took the box from her hand, their fingers brushing. I'd like that, he said softly, being brave together. Outside, the February wind rattled the workshop windows, but inside, something fragile was being carefully mended, not broken pieces. Fitting together, but whole people choosing to build something new. The family recipe book sat closed on Sarah's counter like a judge's gavel, waiting to fall. Jenny had brought it over that morning, her mother's cherished collection of recipes, borrowed years ago, and now pointedly returned. Thought you might want to make something special, she'd said, her tone careful, since you're having everyone over for dinner. Everyone meant Jenny and her husband, Mary and her family, all gathering to meet each other officially. No pressure, Sarah thought. Riley, just their children sizing each other up like opposing teams at a sporting event. Need any help? Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking as nervous as she felt in his good blue shirt and pressed slacks. Could you peel the potatoes? She handed him a peeler, their fingers touching briefly. Jenny brought Mom's recipe, but thought I'd make her pot roast. Ah, he understood immediately. Comfort food as peace offering. Mary's bringing dessert, some fancy chocolate thing her kids love. They worked in comfortable silence, the kitchen filling with familiar sounds and smells. Sarah found herself watching Thomas's hands. Those capable fingers that could frame a house or carve delicate scrollwork, now carefully peeling potatoes as if it were the most important task in the world. The doorbell rang too soon. Jenny's voice carried from the entryway, followed by her husband Bob's deeper tones. Moments later, Mary's family arrived, her husband Dave and teenage sons in tow. Mom! Jenny appeared in the kitchen, eyebrows rising at the sight of Thomas in his domestic role. Need any help? Everything's under control. Sarah wiped her hands on a dish towel. Though you could set the table, the good plates are top cabinet left side. I remember. Jenny's smile was soft. Dad always said they were too fancy for everyday use. Speaking of Dad, Mary joined them, a covered dish in her hands. I brought his favorite dessert, Mom's recipe. The kitchen grew quiet. Sarah looked at Thomas, saw him watching his daughter with gentle understanding. Your mother's chocolate cream pie? He asked. Mary nodded, thought it was appropriate for a family dinner. The emphasis on family hung in the air. Jenny's spine stiffened slightly. Mom made great pies too, she said, a hint of challenge in her voice. Girls, Thomas's voice was quiet but firm. "This isn't a competition." In the living room, they could hear Bob and Dave discovering a shared interest in baseball, their animated discussion of spring training carrying through the house. Mary's boys had found Sarah's photo albums, their laughter mixing with exclamations over old hairstyles and fashion choices. "He's right," Sarah said, opening her mother's recipe book. "Look here." She pointed to a page where two different handwritings mingled, her mother's elegant script and her own messier notes. "Mom always said recipes were meant to be shared, adapted, made new." Mary peered at the page. "Is that the pot roast I smell? Dave loves pot roast." "It's Jenny's favorite too," Sarah said softly. "Has been since she was little." The two younger women looked at each other, something shifting in their expressions. "You know," Jenny said slowly, "I never did get Mum's knack for pie crust. Maybe," she glanced at Mary, "maybe you could show me your technique sometime?" Mary's smile was tentative but genuine. "I'd like that. And maybe you could teach me that sugar cookie recipe. The ones you brought to Christmas last year were amazing. That was Grandma's recipe." Jenny's voice carried pride rather than possession. "I could show you the trick to the icing." Thomas caught Sarah's eye over their daughters' heads, his smile saying everything they couldn't voice aloud. This was how families grew, not by replacing old loves, but by making room for new ones. The oven timer chimed. As Sarah moved to check the pot roast, she felt the warmth of multiple generations of love in her kitchen. Her mother's recipes, Jim's memories, Martha's dessert, and now this new blending of lives and traditions. "Dinner's ready," she announced, and watched as their separate families became, for this moment at least, simply family. The church program trembled slightly in Sarah's hands as she and Thomas walked up the stone steps of First Presbyterian. She'd attended Easter service here for 43 years, the last 8 with Jim. Now, for the first time, she was arriving with someone else. "We don't have to do this," Thomas murmured, though his hand remained steady at the small of her back. "Yes, we do." Sarah straightened her new spring hat, a pale blue that matched her dress. "It's time." They could feel the ripple of attention as they entered the sanctuary. Mrs. Peterson's barely concealed delight, the Henderson twins' wide-eyed stares, Reverend Brooks's knowing smile as he greeted them at the door. "Sarah, Thomas, lovely morning, isn't it?" The usual Easter greetings carried extra weight today. Their seats, their usual separate seats, remained conspicuously empty. Without discussion, they chose a new pew altogether, somewhere in the middle where they could be neither hiding nor displaying themselves. The organist began the prelude, Bach's Easter hymn filling the vaulted space. Sarah found herself studying the program intently, though she knew the order of service by heart. There, in neat typescript, Easter lilies donated in loving memory of James Mitchell and Martha Harrison. Thomas's hand covered hers, warm and sure. When she looked up, she saw he'd noticed the same line. "They'd want us to be happy," he whispered. Before she could respond, the choir processed in, and the congregation rose for the first hymn. As they sang "Christ the Lord is risen today," Sarah felt the familiar words take on new meaning: renewal, rebirth, second chances. Reverend Brooks's sermon touched on similar themes. "Easter reminds us that life continues," he said, his eyes sweeping the congregation. "That love in all its forms can bloom again even after the darkest winter." Sarah felt Thomas shift beside her, his shoulder pressing gently against hers. She thought of their winter together, the leaking roof that had brought them together, the storms they'd weathered, the slow thaw of their hearts. After the service, there was no avoiding the receiving line. Their fellow congregants approached with varying degrees of subtlety. "So wonderful to see you both," Mrs. Peterson gushed, clutching her own program like a fan. "And Sarah, that hat is simply perfect." The Henderson twins darted past, giggling. "Mr. Harrison, are you going to marry Ms. Mitchell? Mom says—" Their mother hustled them away, shooting an apologetic look over her shoulder. "Don't mind them," Thomas said as they made their way to the church steps. "Kids that age? Thomas! Sarah!" Mary's voice cut through the crowd. She was hurrying toward them, still in her choir robe. "You're both coming to Easter dinner, right? Dave's smoking a ham, and the boys are dying to show you their new gaming system." Before they could answer, Jenny appeared from the parking lot. "Mom, I thought I saw your car. Are you and Thomas free for dinner? Bob's grilling and—" She stopped short, seeing Mary. The four of them stood in awkward silence until Sarah found herself laughing. "Well, I suppose this is what we get for not planning ahead. We could—" Mary hesitated, glancing at Jenny. "We could do dinner together? Our place is bigger, and Dave does make an amazing ham." Jenny's face softened. "Bob could bring his famous potato salad, and I have Mom's recipe for that strawberry trifle." Thomas squeezed Sarah's hand. "Sounds like Easter dinner is settled then." As they walked to their cars, they'd driven separately, still maintaining some boundaries. Sarah noticed Reverend Brooks watching them with approval. "Happy Easter, Sarah," Thomas said, pausing by her car. Then, with a glance at their lingering audience, he leaned in and kissed her cheek. "See you at Mary's?" Sarah touched the spot where his lips had been, feeling like a teenager with her first beau. "Save me a seat." His smile held promises of more than just Easter dinner. Always. As she drove home to change for dinner, Sarah thought about the church program in her purse, with its memorial lilies and familiar hymns. She'd keep it, she decided, not as a reminder of what she'd lost, but as a marker of what she'd found. This new chapter that had begun with a leaking roof and was blooming into something beautiful and unexpected. Like the Easter lilies adorning the altar, love could indeed bloom again. The property deed lay between them on Sarah's kitchen table, its official language stark against the soft morning light. 2 houses, side by side on Cedar Grove's maple-lined street. One decision that would change everything. We could sell them. Both, Thomas suggested, not for the first time. Start fresh somewhere new. Sarah traced her finger along the property line on the attached survey map. "And leave your workshop? All your tools, your projects?" "Tools can be moved." But she heard the hesitation in his voice. That workshop held 30 years of memories, of community connections, of Martha's presence in every corner. "And what about my garden? Mum's roses are just starting to bud." Sarah looked out at the backyard where spring was slowly awakening the dormant flower beds. "Besides, this street, it's home." Thomas reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Then we figure something else out." They'd been dancing around this conversation since Easter, both knowing it needed to happen, but neither quite ready to take the lead. Now, with May approaching and the roof finally finished, they couldn't avoid it any longer. "Your house has the workshop," Sarah said slowly, "but mine has more living space. The bigger kitchen, better windows too. Martha always said natural light was important. Jim loved that about this place, said it's why Mum's plants did so well." They sat in comfortable silence, letting memories mingle with possibilities. Outside, a robin landed on the windowsill, pecking at the glass as if offering its opinion. "You know," Thomas said, watching the bird, "that connecting door we talked about for the workshop? We could do something similar between the houses. Turn my place into a proper workspace, maybe a studio for your painting." He smiled at her surprise. "I've seen those art supplies you keep hiding in the spare room." Sarah felt herself blush. She'd taken up watercolors recently, inspired by the way Thomas looked at the world, seeing the beauty in broken things, the potential in what others might discard. "It would take work," she said. "Permits, renovations. Good thing you know. A reliable contractor." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "One who works for home-cooked meals and good company." Sarah stood, pulling him up with her. "Come on. I want to show you something." She led him upstairs to what had been Jim's home. Office. The room had stood largely untouched since his passing, but now she opened the door to reveal cleared shelves, empty drawers, a space waiting to be reimagined. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "This room gets the morning sun. It would make a good reading nook for your books." Thomas looked around the room. understanding the magnitude of what she was offering. This wasn't just about space, it was about making room in her life, in her memories, for something new. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm sure about us. The rest, we'll figure out together." He pulled her close, and they stood in the empty room, imagining possibilities. His woodworking books beside her gardening guides. Their children, visiting for Sunday dinners. Grandkids running between the connected houses. A workshop filled with new projects. A kitchen alive with shared meals. A garden blooming with combined care. "We should talk to Jenny and Mary first," Sarah said, "before we make any final decisions." "Already did." Thomas's smile was slightly smug. "They're the ones who suggested connecting the houses. Said it was about time we stopped pretending we weren't spending every day together anyway." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing in the empty room. "When did our children get so wise?" "About the same time we learned to be brave again, I suppose." Later that evening, as they sat on Sarah's porch watching the sunset, the property deed safely filed away, Thomas took her hand. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "We're going to need a bigger toolbox." Sarah squeezed his hand, thinking of all the projects ahead, not just the physical renovations, but the careful building of a shared life. "Good thing we've got the right tools for the job, and the right partner," Thomas added softly. Above them, the maple trees rustled with new spring leaves, nature's applause for another renovation project beginning on Cedar Grove Street. The hand-drawn wedding arch designs spread across Thomas's workbench, each sketch more elaborate than the last. He'd been at it for days, trying to create something that would honor both their past and future. The latest version incorporated elements from both their gardens, climbing roses from Sarah's yard, twining with the jasmine Martha had planted years ago. "Dad, it's beautiful," Mary said, studying the drawings. She'd stopped by the workshop after dropping the boys at baseball practice. "But are you sure you can build it in time?" Thomas adjusted his reading glasses. 3 weeks is plenty. Already. Have the lumber seasoning in the back." "That's not what I meant." Mary touched one of the sketches. "Mom's jasmine." Sarah suggested it. Thomas set down his pencil. "Said both flowers should have their moment in the sun." Their wedding plans had started small, just family, they'd said. But in a town like Cedar Grove, family had a way of extending beyond blood relations. Mrs. Peterson had appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator. The Henderson twins were practicing a violin duet for the ceremony. Even Tommy Jenkins' boy had offered to be the photographer, having recently discovered a passion for digital cameras. "Speaking of flowers," Mary said, "Jenny called this morning. She found Mum's old flower press in Sarah's attic. They're thinking of making bookmarks for the guests, pressed flowers from both gardens." Thomas smiled, remembering Sarah and Jenny bent over the dining room table the night before, sorting through dried blooms and sharing stories. The way they'd laughed when they found pressed flowers from Jenny's own wedding tucked away in one of Jim's old books. "The girls are getting along better than we hoped," he said, "because they both want you happy." Mary straightened a stray pencil on his workbench, a gesture so like her mother, it made his heart catch. "We all do." The workshop. Doctor creaked open and Sarah poked her head in. "There you are. Oh, hello, Mary. Have you seen the latest designs?" She joined them at the workbench, slipping her hand naturally into Thomas's. They'd grown more comfortable with such displays of affection, especially around their children. "I love the jasmine detail," Sarah said, studying the sketches, "though maybe we could add some of Jim's morning glories. They're just starting to climb the back fence, already planned for it." Thomas pointed to a subtle curve in the arch's design. "They'll wind up this side, meet the jasmine at the top." Mary watched them, her eyes soft. "You've thought of everything." "Not quite everything," Sarah admitted. "We're still debating where to hold the reception. The church hall seems too formal, but our backyard—" "What about here?" Mary gestured around the workshop. "Clear out the equipment, add some lights, maybe that vintage record player Dad's been restoring." Thomas and Sarah exchanged looks. The workshop had been their beginning, where they'd first shared coffee, where they'd weathered storms, both literal and emotional, where they'd slowly built something stronger than a repaired roof. "It's perfect," Sarah said softly. "We'll need to sand the floors," Thomas mused, already mentally rearranging the space. "Maybe build some benches along the walls. And hang Mom's old mason jar lanterns," Mary added, "the ones in the attic." "Jim's records would sound wonderful on that player," Sarah said. "He had quite a collection of dance music." They spent the next hour planning, their ideas flowing together like the flowers in Thomas's design. Mary made lists on her phone while Thomas sketched rough layouts. Sarah disappeared briefly, returning with coffee and cookies, Jim's recipe, but made in Martha's favorite mixing bowl. As the afternoon light slanted through the workshop windows, Thomas found himself studying their shadows on the wall, his, Sarah's, Mary's, all overlapping like the lives they were weaving together. In 3 weeks, they'd stand under an arch that celebrated all their stories, dance in this space that had seen so much of their journey, begin another chapter in their ongoing renovation of love and family. "One thing's certain," he said, wrapping an arm around Sarah. "This will be a wedding uniquely ours, with a little bit of everyone we love," Sarah added, leaning into him. Mary smiled, taking a photo of the final arch design. "Jenny's going to love this. Should I send it to the family group chat?" "When did we get a family group chat?" Thomas asked. "Last week. Mrs. Peterson's in it too. She's been sharing wedding planning tips, very enthusiastic ones." They all laughed, the sound echoing off the workshop walls like a preview of celebrations to come. The wedding guest book lay open on an antique stand in Thomas's workshop, its cream-colored pages quickly filling with messages from their merged community. Mrs. Peterson had outdone herself with the calligraphy on the cover. "Thomas and Sarah's wedding day, a new chapter begins." Sarah stood in her kitchen, watching through the window as the last touches were added to the workshop's transformation. String lights twinkled among the rafters. Mason jar lanterns cast warm glows in the growing dusk. The wedding arch stood in the doorway, Thomas's craftsmanship evident in every detail, roses and jasmine and morning glories all woven together in both wood and living blooms. "Mom," Jenny appeared in the doorway, holding a small box. "Found this in Dad's dresser. I think he meant for you to have it today." Inside lay a simple note in Jim's handwriting, "For when you're ready to dance again." Beneath it, their old wedding song on vinyl. "Oh, Jim," Sarah whispered, touching the record sleeve. Then, wiping her eyes, "Is Thomas's record player ready?" "Mary's setting it up now." Jenny hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want to change into something more formal? We could still run to the boutique." Sarah smoothed her pale blue dress, the same one she'd worn to Easter service. "No, this is perfect. It's who we are." The Henderson twins' violin music began drifting through the evening air. Their signal. Sarah took one last look in the mirror, adjusted the small bouquet of mixed flowers from both gardens, and turned to her daughter. "Well, ready to walk me down the aisle?" "Actually," Jenny smiled, "there's someone else who volunteered." Tommy Jenkins stepped into the kitchen looking dapper in his first suit. "Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Harrison asked if I'd do the honor. Said something about it being fitting since I've been keeping an eye on you all these years." Sarah laughed through sudden tears, remembering all the mornings the boy had refused payment for her paper delivery because he'd promised Jim. The workshop had never held so many people, yet somehow it felt exactly right. Neighbors and friends filled the handcrafted benches Thomas had made. Mary's boys stood proudly as joint ring-bearers. Dave and Bob had positioned themselves as unofficial photographers, capturing every moment, but Sarah barely noticed any of it. Her eyes were fixed on Thomas, waiting for her beneath the arch he'd built with such care. He wore his good blue shirt and a new tie, but more striking was his expression, a look of such joy and certainty. It made her heart skip. Reverend Brooks kept the ceremony simple, understanding that no words could compete with the story written in the workshop's walls and the hearts of those gathered. When it came time for their vows, Thomas took both her hands in his. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady, "I came to fix your roof and found my home instead. You taught me that love isn't about replacing what's lost, but about building something new from the foundation up. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face every renovation life brings with patience, humor, and dedication. And I promise to never stop finding new ways to make you smile." Sarah squeezed his hands. "Thomas, you showed me that a broken heart can be mended without losing its history. That happiness can come in unexpected packages, like a toolbox and a gentle soul. I promise to be your safe harbor, your biggest supporter, and your best friend. And I promise to always have coffee ready in the morning." Their rings were simple gold bands, but they exchanged them with the reverence of those who understood their deeper meaning, not just circles of metal, but symbols of continuity, of love's ability to encompass both memory and possibility. As Reverend Brooks pronounced them husband and wife, the workshop erupted in cheers. Mrs. Peterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The Henderson twins launched into a joyful rendition of Ode to Joy. And then, as their family and friends watched, Thomas's restored record player crackled to life. Jim's wedding song filled the air, its familiar notes carrying new meaning as Thomas took Sarah in his arms for their first dance. They moved together in the space that had seen their love grow, surrounded by the people who had watched it bloom, under the arch that symbolized their intertwined lives. "Happy," Thomas whispered. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the rightness of this moment, this careful, beautiful blending of past and present, of ending and beginning. "More than," she answered. "We built this well." Above them, the mason jar lights glowed like stars, casting their warm light on the next chapter of their renovation story. The new workshop sign gleamed in the summer sunshine. Harrison and Mitchell Home Repairs, building community, one project at a time. Thomas had carved it himself, incorporating delicate roses along the border, a tribute to both their gardens and their journey. "You're sure about the Mitchell part?" he asked, adjusting the sign's position above the workshop door. "Could just be Harrison now." Sarah handed him another nail. "I'm sure. This way, people know they're getting both of us, your craftsmanship and my eye for detail." It had been her idea, born one morning over coffee as they watched Mrs. Peterson struggle with a stubborn window. "We could help," she'd said. "Not just the neighbors anymore, but really help. There are so many seniors in town who need someone they can trust." The phone rang inside, their new business line installed just yesterday. Sarah answered it with practiced warmth. "Harrison and Mitchell Home Repairs. How can we help you?" Thomas watched her jot notes in their shared project journal, smiling at how naturally she'd taken to this new role. She had a gift for putting clients at ease, for seeing the small details that made a house feel like home. "Mrs. Davidson needs help childproofing her house," Sarah reported after hanging up. "Her grandchildren are coming for the summer." "Childproofing?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That's a new one. I thought we could ask Jenny to consult. She just did her whole house for the new baby." They discovered this was the key to their success. Not just fixing things, but understanding the stories behind the repairs. Every loose step, every stuck window, every leaking roof came with a family's hopes and memories attached. The morning brought their first official client, Eleanor Peterson herself, finally admitting she needed help with that window. They worked together seamlessly, Thomas diagnosing the mechanical issue while Sarah distracted their neighbor with questions about her prize-winning dahlias. "You two are something else," Mrs. Peterson said, testing the now smooth window operation. Who would have thought a leaky roof could lead to all this? Back in the workshop, Sarah organized their growing collection of business cards while Thomas updated their schedule board. They decided to limit their jobs to what they could handle comfortably. Quality over quantity, personal attention over profit. "Mary called," Sarah mentioned, filing away Mrs. Peterson's invoice. "Says the boys want to apprentice here during summer break. Learn the family business." Thomas looked up from his scheduling. Family business. he repeated softly, as if tasting the words. Too soon? No. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Perfect timing, though we might need a bigger workshop. Sarah laughed. One renovation at a time, Mr. Harrison. Their next job took them to the Henderson house, where the twins' treehouse needed reinforcement. As they worked, Sarah found herself sharing design tips with Mrs. Henderson, while Thomas taught the girls basic tool safety. See how the grain runs, he was saying, showing them how to sand with the wood's natural pattern. Your violin playing helps here. It's all about feeling the rhythm. By day's end, they had 4 more projects lined up, 2 consultations scheduled, and a growing reputation as Cedar Grove's go-to team for home repairs with a personal touch. We're not just fixing houses, Sarah observed that evening, as they sat on their porch reviewing the day's work. We're keeping stories alive. Thomas nodded, understanding. Every house they worked on held memories. First steps on worn stairs, height marks on kitchen door frames, generations of living marked in the patina of well-used spaces. Speaking of stories, he said, pulling out their project journal, I think we need a special section for the lessons we're learning, things to pass on to the grandkids when they're ready. Sarah took the journal, adding her own notes beside his. Their different handwritings flowed together on the page, just as their lives had intertwined, distinct but harmonious, each making the other more complete. The workshop lights glowed warmly as darkness fell, illuminating their new sign. Tomorrow would bring more projects, more stories, more chances to build something lasting. But for now they sat together in the growing dusk, 2 people who had found not just love, but purpose in their second chapter. The anniversary card sat propped on their breakfast table, its handmade cover displaying a meticulously drawn house with 2 front doors, connected by a flower-lined path. Inside, Thomas had written simply, Thank you for making 2 houses into 1 home. Happy first anniversary. Sarah traced the drawing with her finger, appreciating the detail he'd put into it, the exact angle of her porch steps, the precise shape of his workshop windows, even the climbing roses that now linked their merged gardens. The Henderson twins helped with the coloring, Thomas admitted, setting down their coffee cups, said my flowers needed more artistic flair. 1 year. It seemed both longer and shorter, this span of time since they'd stood in the workshop and promised to build a life together. So much had changed, yet the important things remained constant. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, the steady rhythm of their work together, the way he still looked at her as if she were a particularly beautiful piece of craftsmanship. I have something for you too, Sarah said, reaching for a wrapped package. Though it's really for both of us. Thomas opened it carefully, revealing a leather-bound album. The cover read, The Renovation Project, Year 1. Inside, photographs documented their journey, the original leaking roof that had brought them together, Thomas on the ladder that first day, their early shared meals, the workshop transformation for their wedding, their first business card as Harrison and Mitchell Home Repairs. Between the photos, Sarah had pasted cards and notes from clients, newspaper clippings, and pressed flowers from their combined gardens. Mary helped me with the layout, she explained, and Jenny found some of the earlier photos in her phone. Thomas turned the pages slowly, pausing at an image of them dancing at their wedding. We did good work this year, he said softly. The best kind. Sarah sipped her coffee. Though Mrs. Peterson still insists she deserves partial credit for our success. She's probably right, Thomas chuckled. Did you see her new project? She's organizing a home repair workshop for seniors at the community center. Wants us to teach it. Us? Sarah raised an eyebrow. I thought you were the expert. You're the one who figured out how to help old Mr. Williams organize his garage so he could keep living independently. And who knew exactly how to modify Mrs. Davidson's kitchen for her arthritis? He reached across the table, taking her hand. We each bring something different to the work. That's what makes it special. Through the window, they could see the morning light hitting their workshop sign, making the carved roses seem to glow. Their first appointment wasn't for another hour, plenty of time to enjoy this moment. "Do you ever wonder," Sarah asked, "what Jim and Martha would think about all of this?" Thomas considered the question. "I think Martha would love how the workshop has evolved. And Jim," he smiled, "well, he did tell you not to spend your life alone. He'd appreciate your attention to detail with the roof. Repairs too." They shared a laugh, comfortable now with these mentions of their past loves. Time had taught them that hearts could expand to hold both memory and new joy, just as their homes had adapted to contain their shared life. The sound of a car door made them look up. Tommy Jenkins was dropping off their morning paper, now a college student home for summer break. He waved as he passed, calling out, "Happy anniversary!" "News travels fast," Thomas observed. "In Cedar Grove? Always has." Sarah stood, gathering their coffee cups, ready to start another year of renovations. Thomas pulled her close for a kiss. "With you? Always." Later that day, as they worked together installing support rails in Mrs. Davidson's bathroom, Sarah watched Thomas demonstrate proper mounting techniques to Mary's oldest son. Their summer apprentice was soaking up every detail, his face showing the same focused expression his grandfather got when planning a complex project. The lesson was interrupted by Jenny arriving with her new baby, coming to consult on their next childproofing job. The infant immediately reached for Thomas's beard, causing a round of laughter. This was their life now, family and work intertwined. Each day bringing new challenges and joys, their love story continuing to unfold in the small moments between fixing what was broken and building what was new. That evening they sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies dance between their merged gardens. The anniversary card held a place of honor on their mantel inside, soon to join the album chronicling their journey. "Happy anniversary, Thomas," Sarah said softly. "Happy anniversary, my love," he replied. "Here's to many more renovations together." Above them, stars emerged in the deepening dusk, witnessing another day in their ongoing project of building love from life's unexpected materials.